Hello, I'm Sheila WEBBER, and with Bill Johnston, I'm going to be talking about older people in the post-truth era, countering ageism by developing age-friendly, media and information literate cities. The icon that you can see there is an age-friendly icon developed by the Centre for Ageing Better in the UK. And it's to indicate that age isn't all about deficit and having to catch up. It can be a more positive thing. In this video, Bill and I will be taking it in turns to talk through the slides. And the outline of the video is that, first of all, we're going to be talking about developing the model for an age-friendly media and information literate city. And we're drawing on an article that we wrote a couple of years ago. And if you want more details about some of the literature, the research, the frameworks that we talk about, then you can look at that paper. Then we're going to outline the AFMIL city model and finally talk about applying the AFMIL city model. So firstly, developing a model for the age-friendly media and information literate city. So our inspiration for the model, there were three aspects to this and we're going to talk about them in turn. The first is our engagement with the rights of older people, and we are both older people by any classification. That's me, taken by one of my students with an added cat filter, and I'll be handing over to Bill in a moment and he'll talk about his own engagement with the rights of older people. There's also UNESCO's Global Framework for Media and Information Literate Cities, and this framework was drawn up in 2018 at the Global Media and Information Literacy Conference of 2018, and then with a little consultation it was then published in 2019. That's obviously very relevant to what we're talking about. And finally, there's the international frameworks for older people and cities. And so we're going to be talking about these three aspects in turn. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Bill.
Thanks, Sheila. Well, I retired from my job at Strathclyde University about 10 years ago, so I'm officially retired, an officially accredited older person. And I remained academically active in the meantime. And in addition to that, my work on information literacy and so forth, I became more engaged and active in my local community and later on nationally in advocating for older people's rights, particularly with the Scottish Government. Which is very keen on human rights generally, and it's useful to be able to leverage that. And that's been done very much in the context of an ageing population. Scotland and the UK generally, like many parts of the world, has a population which is steadily ageing. So the idea of simply ignoring age is not an option any longer. Ageism, as you can see here from this slide, describes the problem of getting older people's rights. People are stereotyped, prejudices held against them, they're discriminated against because they're too old, they can't learn quickly enough, they're in the way, they're a fiscal burden on the public purse and so on. Many older people just hear that kind of thing all the time, and it's akin to kind of a form of racism or any other prejudice you might find. The EU quote that we're looking at just now defines the kinds of behaviour and attitudes that are entailed in ageism. And personally, as you can see there also, that I've been chair of the Seniors Alliance in Scotland for about 5 years I was chair, and I've published a number of articles to do with information literacy and older people in Scotland. And I'm working on a forthcoming book on this topic I mentioned earlier, the ageing population. It's about Scotland's ageing population, what to do about it. Sheila obviously may want to say more herself later, has been involved with ageism through the lens of the work of libraries and librarians. So moving on, the UNESCO contribution is an equally important part of our inspiration. And you can see there that it combines the idea of the city and mill in a very useful way. You've got the 5 laws of media and information literacy, and you've also got the idea of mill cities and the network around mill cities, which has emerged. And that provides scope to add older people's rights into that combination of cities and media and information literacy. So that gives us an entry point to hashtag AFMIL.
I'm going to be talking a little bit about the international frameworks. As I said already, we talked about those in our 2019 article. And so I'm just going to pick out a few key frameworks that we studied in order to develop our Mill Cities framework. The first is the World Health Organization publication on age-friendly environments, which is very well evidenced and goes into a great deal of detail, providing guidelines for different policy domains. And crucially, one of the policy domains they address are communication and information, talking about the way in which organizations and cities and other types of environment can provide an age-friendly environment to enable people to communicate and exchange information and access information in an equitable manner. Some other important frameworks that we looked at include the UCLG Committee on Social Inclusion, Participatory Democracy and Human Rights, their publication about human rights in the city, which acknowledge older people and the rights of older people within the urban context. Also, we'd pick out here one of the initiatives to do with smart cities. There are a great deal of initiatives to do with smart cities. Some of them are not necessarily equitable in the way in which they talk about older people, but we picked out the Smart Cities for All initiative because it does focus on inclusion and explicitly on inclusion of older people. And finally, obviously, there are various declarations and proclamations that UNESCO has made on information literacy and then on media and information literacy. For example, the Prague Declaration of 2003, which identified information literacy as a basic human right. And our understanding of media and information literacy is built on these various declarations and proclamations. One of the key things we developed for our examination from all this material were these three perspectives on media and information literacy and older people. And you'll see we put these three perspectives at the heart of our model. And the three perspectives on media and information literacy and older people are two which do come up in the documents we studied, though not as prominently as they could do. But the third one in particular tends to be neglected. So the first one is being concerned about older people as portrayed by media and experts. And for example, in the UNESCO Mill Cities publication, there's recommendations about avoiding stereotyping and disinformation for people of all ages and all types. Older people as consumers of information and media, looking at their preferences, their practices and life experiences, and in particular the age-friendly environments document was useful to draw on for this. But also crucially, older people as media and information literate creators, innovators and critics. And this seems to be an area which is neglected. There are documents about the creative city, international frameworks to do with creative city, which acknowledge the value of older people as creators, as bringing in their own story, their own history to the creative process. But in many documents, this role as creator and innovator tends to be put for younger people, and we felt it's important to emphasize that older people are also creative and innovative and have critical faculties, and also they may be creating new practices with new media. It's not fair to say that the only people that can establish how you should use new media are the young people. The older people might bring their own expertise for development. I'm going on now to briefly outline the AFMIL City model. And here are the two aspects of it put together, and I'll be explaining each part in turn. First of all, the unfolding framework, and then the map of what you might be doing in your local context to enable the AFMIL City. So first of all, these are the enfolding values for the AFMIL City on the outside. And so we drew on these documents to look at what should be the underpinning values for the city, that it should be inclusive, that it should be democratic and participatory. The next level is the support and empowerment specifically for older people. And in looking at the values and strategies supporting this, sources included the World Health Organization document about age-friendly environments, the Smart Cities and the Second World Assembly on Aging, looking at human rights for older people. And so there's the broad enfolding values, there's the one specifically focused on what should be done to support and empower older people. And then there are the media and information literacy values and goals, which you can draw from the Mill Cities document of UNESCO and also from the other proclamations. As I mentioned already, what is media and information literacy for? How is it a basic human right? How is it empowering people? In the centre here, we're flagging up the values, policies and vision of city councils working with older people and other stakeholders to co-create the Athmill City. And that's what we expand upon in the second part of the diagram. Here, we're looking at the city council's own planning mechanisms and structures and the city infrastructure, and thinking of the physical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, and also the social infrastructure that's created within a city through the various manifestations of the city council and government. Then there are the stakeholders' policies and actions, and it would include, obviously, libraries, it would include charities, educational institutions, third sector organisations, and so forth. Then there are the media and communication policy of the city itself. More broadly, it will be situated in a national policy to do with media and communication, and different kinds of agencies. The exact composition of that will vary from country to country, but it would typically include community media and communication groups, sometimes action groups of local citizens. It will include regional and national media organisations, and indeed international organisations, and also social media and other media from around the world that people in the city might be using. We're suggesting and recommending that older people's assemblies and think tanks ought to be a vital part of this mix in helping to identify how older people can become involved in their three roles as consumers, as portrayed in the media, and as creators, innovators, and critics. So the assemblies and think tanks should be influencing the media and communication policy about how are older people being presented. They should also be participating in helping to create that media and communication, as well as participating fully in the life of the city. And so an Athmill City integrates by practicing media and information literacy itself. It is media and information literacy in its policies and in the way it practices, and this includes the way it produces, organises and disseminates information for all its citizens. So it's not enough to say, oh, we'll help our citizens become media and information literate. The actual city itself, in all its manifestations, has to be media and information literate. But obviously developing Mill citizens is also a key thing, and using all forms and formats of media and information to increase the democratic participation and informed critique. And now I'm going to hand over to Bill to talk about applying the Athmill City model.
Well, there's a lot in the model, and I'd encourage people to go back over it and perhaps also to look to the paper that we wrote and follow up with the source documents that we drew down on. But I dare say many people are interested mainly in how we actually apply the model. And in this paper, we're looking at how we would apply that to the problem of the post-truth era, as it's called, a period of time when issues of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, as it came to be a popular term for a good while there, linked up to the idea of populism as a political force, the idea that ordinary people are deified by leaders who wish to get their votes and so forth, and who are often very anti-expertise and anti-knowledge and anti-information. So populism and ageism are powerful forces, and they come together and challenge the values and aims that we have for making media and information literacy an issue tied to older people's human rights. Now, the pandemic that we've been going through and are still going through has highlighted the danger of ageist behaviour. You can see some examples there, this idea that older people who originally, in terms of the risk factors formulated by medics, older people were seen to be particularly vulnerable to COVID-19. And that translated in some interpretations into, well, it doesn't really matter if a lot of 80-year-olds die, and the economy can't be threatened and the health service can't be overburdened to meet the needs of older people. And those attitudes weren't universal, and they were challenged, and rightly so. But it has to be said that, I think the pandemic has really underlined the danger to society of these kinds of ageist attitudes, which are then turned into misinformation and indeed disinformation and indeed propaganda. UNESCO is one of our founding fathers in this, and they make a powerful case, an inspiring case. But as I've tried to outline there, ageism undermines that case very severely. And we think that cities are an important node, they're an important focus for countering ageism and countering the populist propaganda that goes with it. And the model, we think, provides an effective tool to achieve that. So actions, getting the model adopted as part of an agenda for a city and getting it into their planning documents and their planning processes, the relevant committees and decision makers is obviously a key action. And part of that involves finding what's actually going on at the moment. So one of the things about cities is that there's a lot of them and they all do various things, and trying to find out what they're all up to is a task in itself, and I think a very important one. If you could identify points in the activities of a city government which aligned with the Mill City idea, then you would be moving much faster. Sheila already mentioned the inclusion of older people. One of the key problems that I experience and many people experience is that older people are often regarded as an afterthought, or they're taken on board in a very tokenistic way when it comes to making decisions. So as long as an older person is kind of around, that's often seen to be good enough, and it isn't. We really need to be developing older people's agency. And the idea of assemblies, participative democracy is, it's quite a theme at the moment. There are assemblies of various kinds in Scotland, Ireland, other parts of the world. Why not an assembly for older people? And Sheila again mentioned right at the start an image we grabbed from the Centre for Ageing Better, which is well funded in the UK and does good developmental work, could well turn its attention to the kind of issues that we've been describing in this presentation. And I think the final one I would speak about is getting people involved. I wouldn't suggest that this is going to be easy. I think there are a lot of people out there with sometimes the best of intentions, but are really heavily committed to the idea that older people are in deficit. We've become decrepit, we're frail. All these images of the old is really a group you don't have to spend much time or effort on. And in fact, if anything, they're a nuisance because they cost money and so forth. So getting some key people on board, getting council leaders, elected politicians, prime ministers, all those kinds of people are necessary to get on board. So I don't think we should be shy about being ambitious in that direction and really calling out leaders who have plenty to say about racism, but nothing to say about ageism, and really getting into a dialogue with them and persuading them of the case for countering ageism and using Mill as part of that task.
And I'm just going to take over for the last 2 points. The ones that Bill's been describing are ways in which you might engage locally, but obviously there's even more power by networking and collaborating. So, for example, identifying cities which have one or more aspects which could be seen as exemplars and which could be shared and which could be used in discussion with your own local city to show what they could be doing. And also one could create locally a handbook for action on AFMEL cities, but it might be even more powerful to collaborate between cities, between countries, to create a global handbook for action on AFMEL cities. And a final thought on this slide is that UNESCO, the World Health Organization, and the other agencies could actually improve the way they collaborate and coordinate with each other, and even sometimes within one organisation, in developing a more focused agenda, which, as we have done, draws on of the variety of frameworks that are relevant to this area. So finally, we want to leave you with the thought that this is a rights-based, not a deficit-based perspective on older people. And quoting from UNESCO itself, every citizen is a creator of information and knowledge, and every citizen has a message, including the older people. So thank you for that. The references for this are in a website, and we hope that you've enjoyed hearing our talk about the age-friendly, media and information literate city.